Hey everybody, this is Tim Keefe with Transform CX. Wanted to talk a little bit about today about artificial intelligence and how it gets used, particularly in a customer experience interaction. Now, we could argue that in many ways artificial intelligence has been with us for, several years, 5 to 8 years, and we're seeing implementations of it in many different ways. Interactive voice response systems with conditional logic have been in place for a long time. We've had natural language processing in the interactive voice response space for quite a while. And one of the things that I think is consistent with what we see in these spaces is it's how the conversation is designed. I think the ability to recognize voice, or obviously to recognize prompts, or to work in directed dialogue with the customer, again, it's not rocket science. It's been with us for a while. There's been a lot of studies done and some great best practices that have been put forward with regard to design. But again, I think it's the ability to create maybe not a natural conversation, because again, people have been trained and they've learned. Products like Siri and Alexa have really moved people into a place where interacting with a artificial intelligence entity is not as unusual as it was 5 years ago. So one of the things that I think is really important as we go forward and start to introduce more and more AI, particularly in those what we would call tier 0 or tier 1 types of interactions that are mostly status or very straightforward interaction types of conversations, is to make those work. And making it work means that we're monitoring and measuring the effectiveness of it. I laugh a little bit because I've done a lot of projects where we've looked at interactive voice response design for some very famous companies. And one of the first things you do, of course, is look for the documentation. And sometimes the documentation, we've seen documents presented to us that are 10 years, 15 years old. Maybe they're annotated with changes, but fundamentally, the design was pretty much put in place and it was fire and forget. And then, of course, we use the messaging in the front end becomes a great place for people to go, well, while the customer's on hold, let's give them some more information. I remember sitting in a conference room with a client and they dialed into the company IVR, and it was over 3 minutes before we got to the first prompt for a customer. So these are bad practices. Let's acknowledge that's not a good experience for anybody. Today, people want to be able to get to the information that they need as quickly as possible, to do it in a way that at least acknowledges who they are, what services they have, if they're an existing customer. And if they're a new customer, treat them with that value-based conversation as if you would if they were a human being. You're not brusque with a new customer when they walk into the shop. You try and engage with them. Now that's harder in some situations, but with some of the new tools, it's definitely easier to do. And the biggest thing is understanding the intent. So AI, an amazing set of tools, and I work with a lot of companies that have artificial intelligence capabilities within their stack. It's also very, very important to think about the design, to think about the conversation that you're going to have, and how are you going to measure those conversations for effectiveness. What's your ability to capture reporting out of the tool, and what's your ability to introduce continuous improvement cycles to constantly improve the effectiveness of that conversation. So again, thanks for your time today. This is Tim Keefe with Transform CX.